Hi, my name is Judy. I used to be the backbone of my family's company until they cut me out of every photo, every meeting, every legacy I helped build. My brother let his mistress call security on me at our own gala. I didn't yell, I didn't fight, I just vanished from their world like I was never there. But what hurts more, being erased, or realizing the people you protected were the ones quietly replacing you all along. The valet barely acknowledged my car when I pulled up. My aged Honda, its front bumper a little scuffed, was wedged between two black Escalades gleaming under the entry lights. One of the valets glanced up, offered the kind of smile you give a stranger you're not obligated to remember, and turned back to the Bentley behind me. I didn't blame him. In this circle, people don't show up unless they're wearing status, and my status, apparently, had expired years ago. I stepped out slowly, clutching my small leather bag, wearing the only formal dress I hadn't donated to Goodwill. It was navy, modest, pressed with care that morning in the dim light of my rental loft. Around my neck hung my mother's pearl necklace, the one she gave me for my 30th birthday, the only thing from that night I still wore without resentment. The hotel was towering and stately, the kind of place where Southern charm meets quiet arrogance. Every brick whispered legacy. As I stood at the curb, I could hear laughter drifting from the ballroom balcony, the kind of high, musical tones that say, "We've already won." I took a breath, steadying myself before walking inside. I didn't make it far. A young woman in a staff badge gently intercepted me before I reached the red-carpeted entry. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to redirect you to the service hall. Guest flow is backed up tonight." She didn't wait for my answer. I blinked, turned slightly, and found myself ushered around the side of the hotel, through a narrow passageway that smelled like bleach and dishwater. I passed carts stacked with half-filled champagne flutes, heard the clink of plates being scraped into bins. Linen bags lined the hallway like silent witnesses. I kept walking. When I emerged from the corridor and into the side foyer, a man standing by the guest list podium looked up and frowned. "Are you with Floral Setup?" I stared at him, startled. "No," I said quietly. "I'm Judy Thorne." He stared at me blankly. "Oh," he replied, as if that clarified nothing. He turned his attention to the next arriving guest in a sequined silver gown, leaving me standing next to the complimentary coat check I no longer needed. There were no signs pointing me toward the ballroom, no name tag waiting at the table. And still, I walked forward. As I stepped into the main floor, the room flickered with soft golden light. It was beautiful in a sterile way, all polished marble and flower arrangements too tall for conversation. People milled about in gowns and tuxedos, holding flutes of champagne, nibbling from tiny skewers that glistened with gold leaf. Everything sparkled, everyone sparkled, and I didn't. I moved slowly along the outer rim, scanning for anyone I might recognize. Most faces were either unfamiliar or vaguely familiar in a way that only stings. I was halfway across the room when a woman in a low-back black dress tapped my shoulder. "Oh, I'm sorry," she said, tilting her glass toward mine. "Could I get another Prosecco?" I blinked. "I don't work here," I replied. She gave me a once-over, then that half-smile people use to disguise condescension, and turned away. I stood still. My fingers curled into my palm as I fought the urge to explain myself to no one in particular. From a nearby table, I caught a snippet of conversation. "I heard she's his sister or something." "Doesn't quite fit, though, does she?" The words weren't even whispered. They weren't meant to be hidden. And in that moment, I realized this wasn't about my dress, or my car, or even my job title. It was about making sure I remembered that I no longer belonged. Years ago, this very event had been my idea. The Sterling Empire 20th anniversary. I had proposed it in a marketing meeting before the rebranding swallowed my role whole. I had brokered vendor deals, set the budget, even sketched the original invitation on a napkin at Denny's. I remembered sitting across from Nobel, my brother, pitching the concept with the kind of fire that only comes when you still believe your work matters. And now, here I was, watching that vision unfold under Sabra's name, her fingerprints over every glittering surface. The decor was colder, shinier, more expensive, but none of it had heart. It didn't look like something that had been built. It looked like something that had been purchased. I spotted a familiar face across the room. My cousin, Dan. I moved toward him, raising a hand slightly. He looked up, recognized me, then looked away just as quickly. A staff member stepped between us with a tray of shrimp tartlets. I stopped walking. Then came the cruelest moment. My niece, Katie, walked right past me without so much as a blink. Her dress was ice blue, her hair pinned just like her mother used to do it. I wanted to reach out, to say something, but my voice caught somewhere beneath the pearls on my throat. At the bar, Nobel stood beside Sabra. He was smiling, throwing his head back in laughter, his hand resting on her waist. He didn't look toward me, didn't nod, didn't flinch. I approached the seating chart, feeling the air thin around me. My name wasn't there. I asked the young man managing the list if he could double-check. He flipped the pages slowly, hesitantly. He said. I don't see a thorn, but maybe it was a last-minute change? A last-minute change. That's how legacies vanish, through quiet omissions and polite shrugs. I found myself standing near the champagne fountain, alone, awkward, invisible. A woman bumped into me without apology. I caught sight of another staffer quietly removing a small card from one of the side tables, one that might have said, "Reserved for Ms. Judy Thorne." I'll never know for sure. It felt like standing in a house you helped build, only to discover your photo had been replaced on every wall. But as the air grew heavier, I reached for the necklace at my throat, my fingers curling around the smooth pearls. They couldn't erase what I built, even if they took my name off the program. Even if they handed my ideas to someone else, even if they replaced me in every photo, every brochure, every seat at the table, I still built it. I didn't cry. I didn't storm out. I just stood taller. And as I turned toward the ballroom doors, ready to make my entrance whether they liked it or not, I caught Sabra watching me from across the room. She was smirking, that smug, polished grin that said she thought she'd won something I hadn't even realized I was fighting for. She thinks I'm going to walk away. Not this time. The ballroom was warmer than I remembered, not in temperature, but in the way light touched every glass surface. Everything shimmered, as if someone had buffed reality down to a sterile gloss. I paused under one of the chandeliers, each bulb twinkling like it knew a secret, and took in the space I had once helped design on paper, but had never imagined living in like this, like a ghost. I stepped forward slowly. Every eye I passed flicked past me like I was part of the decor, something to avoid tripping over. The same people who used to greet me with hugs and, "Honey, it's been too long," now just nodded tightly or didn't look at all. And yet, a few feet away, Sabra was being pulled into selfies, offered wine, her arm clutched like she was the matriarch of the entire damn dynasty. There's a Southern saying that rang in my ears: smiles can kill softer than knives. In that moment, I understood it fully. The room was a curated performance, and my presence had cracked the scenery just enough to make everyone uncomfortable. I was an echo walking into a scripted celebration, and no one wanted to hear what didn't match the script. I made my way toward the host stand, needing some form of grounding, even if it was just a card with my name on it. The woman behind the podium looked young, early 20s, polished, likely memorized a greeting off a training binder. She flipped through the seating chart with a soft frown. "Name?" she asked. "Judy Thorne." Her fingers hovered, then flicked a few pages back and forth. She looked up. "I'm sorry. Are you sure you're on the list?" I said nothing for a beat. Then, carefully, "Yes, I RSVP'd 3 weeks ago." She gave a quick nod and said she'd go double-check with someone in the back. She didn't come back. I waited and waited. Eventually, a junior staffer, barely more than a kid, approached me with a mix of nervousness and pity. "Ma'am, I think there may have been a spacing issue. Some names got, shifted around during final confirmation." He didn't say removed, but I heard it. "I guess yours didn't make it back," he added, eyes darting to the floor. Across the room, I saw the head table. 8 chairs, each one perfectly aligned, name cards glinting under the soft candlelight. 2 of those names were business partners from Texas, both of whom I had introduced to Nobel years ago during our expansion push. They hadn't even been part of Sterling 6 months ago, and here they were. And I wasn't. The insult wasn't the lack of a chair, it was the careful deletion of my presence. Erasing someone is the cruelest form of remembering them. I didn't show anything on my face, just turned and walked away slowly, as though I had been going to the restroom all along. Not 10 minutes later, a waiter made his rounds with a tray of drinks. He passed right in front of me twice. The second time, I raised a hand gently. "Could I get a club soda, please?" He paused, flustered, then nodded and disappeared behind a curtain. A moment later, he returned and, without a word, placed a short glass in my hand and walked off. It was empty. I looked at it for a beat, then smiled faintly, set it on the corner of a nearby table, and folded my hands in front of me. It wasn't service, it was performance. A message. In Charleston, we don't shout. We deny. Across the room, Sabra raised her flute in a mock toast, laughing with a trio of women who used to attend my housewarming parties. The orchestra warmed up behind her. A toast was about to begin, and I was still standing. I could have marched up, taken one of those extra seats, and dared anyone to object. I could have raised my voice, demanded answers, shamed them into action, but I didn't. My father used to say, "If they think you don't matter, make your absence felt." I drifted quietly to the back of the room, positioning myself behind a potted fern so large it could have hosted birds. From that angle, I could see the whole room, and none of it saw me. The lights dimmed. The music started. Applause rose as the announcer welcomed Nobel and Sabra to the stage, and in that orchestrated darkness, something inside me shifted. I looked for one face, just one, that might hold a glimmer of recognition, of discomfort, of loyalty. Nothing. Former coworkers? Silent. Former family friends? Silent. Even the priest who had blessed our childhood home refused to meet my eyes. Someone near me murmured, "She should have dressed for the occasion. You can't show up in navy and pearls and expect to fit in." I breathed in, slowly, deeply. The air was thick with perfume and champagne, and underneath it all, something rotten. Eleanor Roosevelt once said, "No one can make you feel inferior without your consent." I didn't cry, didn't fume. I made a decision. They would get nothing from me, not a tear, not a scene, not a gasp. I slipped out through the side, unnoticed, not by everyone. Sabra's gaze followed me, head tilted slightly, as if she were a cat watching something it thought was already dead. She thought she had won. That much was clear. But outside the ballroom, as the music dimmed behind the double doors and I stepped into the cool hallway, I paused. I didn't feel broken. I felt clean. My heart wasn't racing out of shame. It was clear. Focused. I whispered aloud, to no one in particular. I wasn't removed. I was released. And I meant every word. I walked in uninvited. I'm leaving unforgotten. Rain had just started falling as I stepped out onto the sidewalk, the light drizzle dimpling the concrete like the sky was holding back a bigger storm. The wind carried the scent of garden soil and wet stone, and I let it fill my lungs in place of words I couldn't speak back in the ballroom. My heels tapped in rhythm with the soft rain, echoing down the near-empty street. Charleston had quieted, but not for me. I walked the full 6 blocks to my rental loft. No rideshare, no calls, just me, the rain, and the ringing silence in my pocket. I pulled my phone out halfway home, just to confirm what I already knew. No texts, no missed calls, especially not from Nobel. You'd think after everything, after letting Sabra humiliate me in front of 200 people, he'd at least send one message, even if it was empty. But nothing came. When I got inside, I peeled off the dress and hung it carefully, even though it didn't deserve the dignity. I stood barefoot on the hardwood floor, cold against my skin, and stared at myself in the bathroom mirror. The pearl necklace still hung at my throat, as if it had refused to absorb the shame. I unclasped it slowly, laid it on the counter, and turned off the lights. Then I sat. Just sat there in the dark. The kind of silence you can only hear when everything else has stopped. That's when the old voices sneak in. Mom's warning tone when I volunteered for too much. Dad's dry chuckle when he called me the glue nobody saw, and Nobel, calling me the quiet one, like it was praise, like invisibility was a virtue. It's always after the party that the truth shows up, not in the spotlight, but in the shadow it leaves behind. I found myself replaying that moment when our eyes met in the ballroom. It wasn't a glance, it was deliberate. He saw me, fully, and turned away. No startle, no guilt, just dismissal. That kind of decision doesn't come from uncertainty. It comes from intent. The worst part? I'd still held out hope. Some pathetic sliver of childhood belief that my big brother would defend me like he used to, like the time he stood in front of me on the playground when Paul Martin tried to yank my backpack off my shoulders. Back then, Nobel's stance made me feel untouchable. And last night, it made me feel erased. I opened my phone and tapped on an old family video saved in my cloud. The screen lit up with an image of a Thanksgiving from 6 years ago. Nobel stood, drink in hand, smiling with a sincerity I now questioned. "This one," he said, gesturing toward me. "This one's the rock of this family, the one holding everything up when we're too distracted to notice." The video froze. My thumb hovered over the screen. Was he lying then, or is he lying now? Or maybe the only lie was me believing either version mattered. I stood and crossed to my suitcase, unzipping the front compartment to retrieve a thin plastic sleeve. Inside were the original invoices from our mother's funeral, the ones I paid out of pocket, the ones that detailed every bloom I chose, every arrangement I coordinated. Gardenias, blue thistle, eucalyptus, that specific mix. The same mix Sabra used for the gala centerpieces. Not a coincidence, a calculated theft. She'd used my mother's memory as interior design. They used Mom's memory as decoration, I muttered, as aesthetic, as branding. A Southern expression echoed in my head, one Mom used whenever someone dressed up their cruelty and charm. Some people would iron a flag just to step on it neater. I wanted to scream. Instead, I just stood there, gripping the folder. Had Sabra found the old files? Or did Nobel offer them up himself? Either way, it was another message sent through silence. You don't belong here, not even in death. I laid the folder on my bed and moved to my desk. The laptop glowed softly as I opened it, the familiar startup chime like a pulse restarting. I began cataloging, not emails, not budgets, a ledger of sacrifices. Every yes I'd given to support that company. The time I co-signed a loan for Sterling when banks said no. The night I stayed up ghostwriting a speech for Nobel that landed our first investor. The crisis I handled when an executive was caught at a strip club 2 weeks before a shareholder meeting. Quiet things, hidden things, but not forgotten. I opened a folder titled Backbone. Inside were subfolders: Crisis averted, Partnership saves, Mom debt cleared. Every document was tagged, every timestamp preserved. "They don't need to thank me," I whispered, "but they'll remember who made their silence possible." For the first time in a long time, the absence of applause didn't sting. It clarified. Recognition wasn't what I lacked. I'd been robbed. I didn't fade. I was buried. The moment that realization hit, it settled into something hard and cold in my chest. Not bitterness, clarity. I remembered something Toni Morrison once said. I'd heard it at a university event years ago when she'd spoken softly into a room full of people too distracted to really hear her. If you want to fly, you gotta give up the shit that weighs you down. Tonight, I gave up waiting to be invited back into a house I helped build. I sat straighter, opened the finance software I still had access to, the one linked to our old family trust, and Sterling's earliest accounts. I began with the oldest entries. Cross-referencing dates, matching contributions. One by one, I highlighted the transactions where my money had held them afloat. Click, click, click. Every file felt like a lit match, and I didn't need fire. I needed proof. I didn't know exactly what the next step was yet, but it was going to be mine, not reactive, not desperate, strategic. Staring at the screen, I felt something crack, not like something breaking, but something unsealing. "If they think I'll go quietly," I whispered into the empty room, They forgot who taught them how to. The rain hadn't stopped, and neither had my mind. Charleston's gray sky filtered through the sheer curtains of my loft like a soft apology for the night before. I hadn't slept, just drifted in and out of thought, retracing steps, cataloging stairs, archiving silences. I got out of bed before the alarm I hadn't set could remind me what day it was. The kitchen smelled like paper and stale air. I made coffee, not because I needed caffeine, but because the act was mine. A quiet defiance. No schedule, no audience, no one to perform for. I poured it black, let it sit on the counter as steam rose and vanished. There's a strange thing about pain. It doesn't always scream. Sometimes it simmers, finding its place in your bones before you realize it's made a home there. I watched the coffee and thought, last night wasn't the collapse. It was the rehearsal for the collapse. My pearl necklace still lay untouched on the nightstand. I glanced at it, but didn't touch it. Not yet. I wasn't ready to wear that weight again. One move at a time. That's how this would go. I sat at the table, fingers laced around the warm mug, and let my mind return, only briefly, to that moment I was led out of the ballroom. No one had noticed. No one had stopped the servers or questioned why the woman who once signed their paychecks was being escorted out like a stranger with bad manners. But I remembered everything, the way my fingers clutched my vintage leather clutch, not shaking, not clenched, just firm. Inside, it wasn't just lipstick and gum. It held the original copy of the contract I'd co-signed with Sterling Empire over a decade ago. One of the only physical proofs of what I'd given them, what I'd built. They didn't know I walked out with ammunition, and I didn't need them to. I pulled out my notebook. The same one I used to sketch expansion ideas back when I thought I had a seat at the table. On a fresh page, I wrote one word in bold. Reclaim. I didn't need paragraphs yet, just that. I opened my laptop and stared at the inbox. It was empty. Not one message. Not a, sorry you were treated that way. Not a, can we talk? Not from Nobel. Not from Sabra. Not from anyone. I clicked through media coverage of the gala. Every headline glowing, every image carefully edited. Nobel and Sabra grinning like nothing was broken. Hashtags about family legacy and the empire grows dotted their posts. I searched for my name. Nothing. They didn't mention me. Not in speeches. Not in photos. Not in captions. I had been edited out of a night that should have honored the people who started it all. And that included me. You don't just disappear, I murmured, eyes narrowing at the screen. You're replaced, pixel by pixel. I closed the browser and opened a folder marked Voice Notes, Legal. I wasn't sure why I clicked that one, but as I scrolled, I found an old file I hadn't touched in years. It was marked, Old, Mom, Don't Delete. My hand hovered, then clicked. The speaker crackled. Judy, baby, if you're listening to this, it means you're probably sitting alone somewhere with a cup of coffee, trying to pretend you're not hurting, but I know you. They don't see what you carry. But I do. If one day you walk away, know I understand. Her voice was soft, sure. Not sad, just there. A hand on my shoulder I'd forgotten I needed. I didn't cry. But something shifted in my chest. Like a knot pulling loose after years of pretending it wasn't there. I scribbled her words on a yellow sticky note and pressed it to the mirror. I understand. That sentence did something 1,000 apologies never could. It anchored me. I wasn't alone, not really. She saw me. Even now. I opened a blank email draft and addressed it to Nobel. I didn't write a greeting. I just listed facts. My financial contributions to the company's founding, a timeline of decisions I was excluded from, 3 crises I quietly fixed behind the scenes, each one that could have sunk Sterling Empire if I hadn't acted. No pleading. No accusations. Just clarity. I ended the draft with one sentence. This is not revenge. This is accounting. I didn't send it, not yet. But it existed now. That was enough. I closed the lid of my laptop and leaned back, letting the quiet settle in. The room felt heavier, but not suffocating, like it was filled with air I could finally breathe again. The coffee had gone cold. I sipped it anyway. Then, as I was setting the mug down, my phone buzzed. A text. Unknown number. We saw what happened. Are you okay? I stared at the message. My fingers hovered, but I didn't type anything back. I didn't know who we was, and I didn't know if this was kindness or the beginning of something else. When the silence breaks, I whispered, you better be ready to speak with precision. I poured myself a second cup of coffee without tasting the first. The kitchen clock ticked toward 1 in the afternoon, and I hadn't eaten, hadn't spoken a word aloud since I woke. There was no hunger, just this dull hum beneath my ribs, something that felt like precision waiting to be sharpened. My clutch sat on the small table by the front door, where I'd dropped it the night of the gala like it might contaminate anything near it. I picked it up now, set it on the table, and opened it slowly, deliberately. Nestled among the lip balm and folded tissues was the folded event seating chart I'd quietly removed from under a centerpiece. I smoothed it flat on the table, my eyes scanning down the printed names. My name wasn't just missing, it had been replaced. Slot number 9 at the main table, my original seat, now read Gavin Elton Marks, a venture capitalist from Houston who hadn't been part of our company 3 months ago. I knew because I was the one who'd sent him the first deck before Sterling decided I wasn't part of the brand image. I picked up the event brochure next. It was glossy, heavy stock, covered in golden ink and a quote from Nobel. Sterling Empire was built on legacy, innovation, and unity. Unity. Not a single photo featured me. Even the ones I knew, without a shadow of a doubt, had originally included me. The product launch from 2014, the charity gala I hosted alone while Nobel was in Switzerland, they'd been cropped or replaced. You're not just removed, you're rewritten. I opened my laptop and snapped high-resolution shots of every brochure page, the seating chart, even the nameplate from my intended table, which I'd also taken, slipped into my clutch as a reflex, more instinct than plan. I created a new folder. Intentional deletion. This wasn't pain anymore. This was a case file. As I clicked through photos, something surfaced from the depths of the night. A moment I hadn't thought about since it happened, but now burned in my memory like a brand. The card. I'd handed my business card to the assistant at the welcome podium as part of standard protocol. She'd smiled, a sweet, shallow expression, and turned slightly to her left. I hadn't noticed at the time, but I did recall seeing her hand drop low near the podium trash bin. I tapped into the security feed. A habit from years in compliance, I still wore a small clip-on cam when attending high-level functions. I kept it for liability purposes. I cued the footage. There it was. She smiled, nodded, and without hesitation, dropped my card into the trash behind her hip. Her voice was low, barely audible, but the mic caught it. We don't need her name clogging up the top row. I stared at the screen. My throat didn't tighten. My stomach didn't sink. What settled inside me was colder than that, measured. Sometimes the quietest cuts are the deepest. But now I bleed ink and contracts. I copied the clip into the same folder, renamed it Erasure Caught Live MP4. They thought I wouldn't see it. They didn't know I had receipts. I turned back to the browser and loaded the official recap video from the gala. I hadn't had the stomach to watch it before, but now I clicked play, volume low, posture sharp. The video was beautifully produced. Drone shots of the hotel, close-ups of champagne flutes, candid laughter under chandeliers. Then came the timeline montage, the history of Sterling Empire. I braced for it. There it was, our early days. The warehouse Nobel and I had converted into our first office. I recognized the space, the angle. I knew exactly which photo they had used to open that phase. Except I wasn't in it. Next, the 2011 investor panel. I was the keynote speaker that year. I still had the dress. Gone. Then the 2016 expansion into Denver. That campaign was my baby. Months of strategy, of calls, of sleepless nights. No mention, no footage, no slide. They even used the family portrait from our mother's 60th birthday, but cropped me out so cleanly you'd think I was never born. When someone removes you from your own story, write a better one in ink they can't smudge. I hit screen record. captured every second, saved the file. I opened a blank email to one of our early investors, an old friend, someone who'd texted after the gala with a polite, "Didn't see you there. Hope all is well?" I typed slowly. "Hi, Martin. Thanks for reaching out. I wasn't present in any official capacity at the event, despite being part of the founding team. You may have noticed my absence in materials. This was not accidental. Should any clarity be needed around the historical foundation of Sterling's early phases, financial, structural, or personnel, I'm happy to provide accurate documentation. Hope you and Diane are well. Best, Judy, P.S. I've always believed in building quietly. Now I believe in clarity, too. I hit send. I sat back, exhaled. It didn't feel vindictive. It felt necessary. Then I did laundry. Then I vacuumed. Then I cleaned the sink. Reclaiming power doesn't always look like fire. Sometimes it's just putting your name back where it belongs. I texted Greer. I'm ready to move. There was no doubt anymore. No pause. The silence they used to bury me, I'd weaponize it. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed. New email. Subject line. Regarding your concerns. From Sterling's new PR manager. I opened it. Please refrain from engaging further with our partners. This matter has been noted internally. No greeting, no signature, just corporate warning dressed in sterile language. I read it once, then again, and then I smiled. Cold, slow, sure. They think I'm trying to be heard. I'm preparing to be remembered. The email sat at the top of my inbox with the subject line, Room Change Confirmation. I stared at it, already knowing what it would say. But I clicked anyway. My reservation at the hotel, confirmed twice, paid for in full weeks ago, had been canceled the morning of the gala, 3 hours before guests began to arrive. The new message from the hotel's front desk blamed internal reshuffling and offered a discounted rate for a future stay, like that would erase the humiliation of having nowhere to sleep after they kicked me out of my own legacy celebration. But what truly dug in wasn't the language of apology, it was the timestamp on the request. The cancellation came from an internal Sterling Empire email, not customer service, not admin. Executive access. That wasn't a scheduling error. That was a message. I let out a short, humorless laugh. You don't just lock someone out of the building, I whispered. You make sure they don't even sleep under the roof. This wasn't just personal anymore. This was institutional. I closed my laptop and walked to my file cabinet. Years ago, I'd kept credentials from my compliance role, secure access to back-end communication logs and archived bookings for board member events. Most had been revoked when I stepped down. Most, not all. 15 minutes later, I had what I needed. An internal authorization email signed off by one of Sabra's assistants, Delaney Pierce. The body of the message read, Cancel room 103. Do not reassign or offer alternative accommodations. Guest will not be staying on site. They had named me guest, not investor, not former executive, not co-founder. Guest. True power isn't who enters the room. It's who decides who's not allowed in. I printed the email, folded it carefully, and added it to the file labeled Intended Omission. The anger didn't rise like a fire. It dropped like a stone. I picked up my phone and called Greer. Hi, it's me. Initiate full liquidation. All of it. A pause. Judy, are you sure? I'm sure. You realize what this means. You'll lose decision-making power. Full removal from the cap table. You'll be pulling $30 million out of their operating capacity mid-quarter. Exactly, I said. Let them learn how much I mattered through numbers. By nightfall, we'd filed the authorization papers with my financial advisor, issued transfer protocols through the family trust, and set everything in motion for the official withdrawal to process at 9:01 a.m., Monday morning. I watched Greer's confirmation email slide into my inbox. Subject, finalized. No fireworks, no champagne, just silence. They gave me a back seat, I muttered. I'm taking the wheels off the car. Then I got to work. No rage, no improvisation, just structure, documentation, legal clarity. I notified the trust managers that my share of the company's licensing rights were no longer to be extended to the current Sterling marketing initiatives. I had helped draft those agreements. I knew every clause. I knew how to pull every string. By 8 p.m., I had emailed the board. Subject: withdrawal of legacy contributor. Body: effective immediately. Please consider this formal notice that I am severing all remaining strategic, operational, and financial ties to Sterling Empire Holdings. Further use of my intellectual property, contributions, and proprietary frameworks must cease unless renegotiated in writing. Best, Judith Thorne. I didn't proofread it twice. I didn't need to. I built the table they're feasting at. Now I'm taking back every chair. The air in my loft felt colder that night. Not sharp, not painful, just cleaner. The way things feel after you've thrown out everything that no longer serves you. And still, no calls. Not from Nobel. Not from Sabra. Not even from anyone on the board pretending to act concerned. I wasn't surprised. We don't confront here. We suffocate each other with etiquette. I turned on Chopin and poured a glass of water. Then I filed every document, every scan, every screenshot into a hard drive labeled simply, Judy Proof. This wasn't spite, it was preservation. I no longer needed anyone to see what I'd done. I needed them to see what happened when I walked away. At 11:04 p.m., my phone buzzed. Once, then again, then 12 times in the next 2 minutes. Missed call, Nobel. Missed call, Sabra. Missed call, CFO Sterling Holdings. Missed call, Sterling Communications Line. The sound was no longer intrusive, it was rhythmic. Like a bell tolling after the final blow, I picked up the phone, glanced once at the screen, and placed it face down on the table. They wanted silence. I gave them the kind that echoes. Silence isn't always surrender. That was the first thing I reminded myself when the calls stopped. After the initial flurry, 12 in 1 minute, all ignored, the line went dead. No voicemails, no follow-ups, just stillness. They were regrouping. I knew it in my gut. That kind of quiet wasn't relief. It was strategy. I'd played that game enough times to recognize the signs. You let the room fall silent so you can control what gets said next. Greer was ahead of me as usual. Judy, she said on the phone that morning, you understand that the PR department over there isn't just asleep. They're building something, a new story. They'll paint your withdrawal as emotional, reactive. You're being turned into a problem, not a partner. I'm not a problem, I said evenly, staring at my laptop. I'm a precedent. The coffee next to me had gone cold. Again, I didn't reheat it. I spent the next few hours making sure my records were airtight, time-stamped, cross-referenced, irrefutable. This wasn't about rage anymore. It was about positioning. By early evening, my phone lit up with a message from Celestia, a family friend who'd attended the gala. Judy, she wrote, I tried to find you that night. They told me you weren't attending. Redirected me to another section. I stared at the message for a long time, fingers still. Another message followed. I even asked for your table. They said it didn't exist. That was when it clicked. It hadn't just been about isolating me. They'd made sure no one could even reach me. Sabra's fingerprints were all over this. They didn't just erase me. They cut me off from anyone who might remember I was supposed to be there. I pulled up the security footage from my clip cam again. Not for myself. This time, I wanted to watch who got rerouted, who was told I wasn't in attendance. 5 names. All people who'd texted me afterward, surprised I hadn't been seen. It wasn't clumsiness. It was a wall. They knew I had witnesses, I muttered, so they made sure I had none. And they weren't done yet. By 6:30 that evening, an email popped up in my inbox, forwarded by one of our older investors who'd always had a soft spot for the Thorne girl with the big ideas. Subject line, Media Statement, Sterling Press Release. I opened it. Sabra's photo smiled back at me in high-resolution, flawless makeup, that polished southern poise she'd perfected since attaching herself to Nobel's side. In bold letters, Sterling Empire launches Dignity Drives Growth initiative, inspired by the feminine legacy of leadership. My jaw locked. I read the entire statement twice, every sentence, every carefully chosen word. It was lifted, piece by piece, from a proposal I had written 3 years ago, a strategy outline for female-led expansion. One I'd sent directly to Nobel, marked private draft, for review only. No credit, no citation, just repackaged confidence under Sabra's name. She wasn't just mimicking me, she was staging a coup with my own voice. They didn't just steal my voice, I whispered. They rehearsed it better. I stood up, walked away from the laptop, paced the kitchen twice, then returned to my desk. It wasn't just about me now. I opened my archives, found the original deck, slides, annotations, strategy points, even my mother's quote that had closed the final slide. Built from the unseen hours of the women who chose strategy over spotlight. That line was sacred to me. It had come from my mother during a car ride home after a rough investor meeting. I'd built the entire proposal around it. And now, it was the final flourish in Sabra's speech at a televised launch event. I didn't feel heat rise in my chest this time. I felt cold, clear. She wasn't just occupying my seat. She was trying to forge my name into hers. I texted Greer. They're running my ideas under her brand. No attribution. I have the originals. Her response came within 30 seconds. We file tomorrow. You're not fighting for credit. You're correcting the record. Still, I hesitated. Not because I doubted the legal move, but because I knew exactly how they'd spin it. The bitter sister, the scorned woman, the unstable former executive. Their narrative is already forming, I said to Greer later that night over a call. If I don't frame this now, they'll define it for me. Then let's frame it, she replied. We spent the next hour creating a document, not a press release, not an exposé, just a simple, fact-based timeline of who created what, when. Screenshots, draft dates, email headers, metadata, a private file, nothing published, yet. I also recorded a video journal, just for myself, just in case. The world doesn't need to see me yell, I said into the camera, my voice low, controlled. It needs to see me prove. I hit save, labeled the file, closed the screen. Just as I was about to shut down for the night, a notification popped up on my laptop. Your copyright claim for Dignity Drives Growth has been denied. I frowned, clicked through. Reason: existing claim filed by Sterling Holdings, Inc. I froze, then leaned back slowly. They didn't just erase my name, I whispered, the words solid in my throat. They replaced it with
The morning air didn't feel like any other. It was too still, too intentional, like the world was holding its breath just long enough to let me move first. I sat on the edge of my bed, palms resting on my thighs, the silence in the loft almost ceremonial. Greer's message had come in at 6:42 a.m. Today's the window, noon deadline. You ready? Ready wasn't the word I'd use, but I was aligned, focused. I'd spent the last 2 days organizing every file, cross-checking timestamps, making sure there wasn't a single sentence they could discredit. My laptop hummed softly as I reviewed the final folder: slide decks, strategy drafts, internal emails between me and Nobel, early logo mocks with my margin notes. I dressed in charcoal gray, not for mourning, but for intention. Mama once told me, that color doesn't beg for attention, it declares presence. At exactly 11:59 a.m., I pressed send. Subject: breach of attribution, attached documents for review. The email went to every Sterling board member, 3 longtime investors, 2 legal contacts, and 1 press liaison I trusted from my previous work. Inside the email were the artifacts: original pitch decks labeled with creation dates, scanned copies of email threads where I outlined the foundation of Dignity Drives Growth, and screenshots of metadata that tied it all back to me. Not one word of emotion, just facts. I didn't accuse. I corrected. 5 minutes later, the email had been opened 46 times. 1 board member replied, "We need to talk." Another simply forwarded the message to a private executive thread. I watched the view count rise like a stock on the verge of crashing. By early afternoon, whispers reached the press. Not from me, but from someone on the inside. The leaks started small: industry newsletters, obscure blogs. Former co-founder silenced at Sterling? Did she build it first? Then came the bigger outlets, circling like vultures sensing a boardroom war. Sabra's title on the company's website changed mid-morning. Legacy Vision Partner became Brand Ambassador. That wasn't a typo. That was a correction. At 2:17 p.m., Nobel called for an emergency board meeting. I wasn't invited, but one of the investors, Martin Caldwell, requested I have proxy representation. Greer stepped in for me. I stayed at the loft, watching it all unfold from my desk with a cold glass of water and a stomach that finally wasn't in knots. They used silence to erase me, I said under my breath. I'm using facts to make them echo. The board meeting began at 3:00 p.m. At 3:08, Greer texted, "They brought your deck into the room." My hand gripped the glass tighter. At 3:16, "They're comparing it slide by slide." Greer later told me the room had gone dead quiet when the final slide came up. Mine.
3 years old, dated, watermarked, with the same closing lines Sabra had used in her public keynote. Built from the unseen hours of the women who chose strategy over spotlight. They hadn't even changed the punctuation. Greer recorded it. A board member said, "She's not claiming credit. She's reclaiming identity." They didn't know I was listening, but I was. "They're rattled," Greer said in a voicemail. "They weren't ready for documentation. You gave them receipts. All they had was spin." By evening, the cracks weren't just visible, they were gaping. Industry blogs ran full summaries of the board meeting. Former colleagues began reaching out to clarify old misunderstandings. PR reps sent backdated statements to preempt lawsuits. LinkedIn lit up with backhanded compliments disguised as outreach. "Always admired your tenacity, Judy. Hope you're finding peace." I didn't respond. I sat by the window, watching the rain roll down the glass, slow and steady. I ate crackers from a box like they were gold-plated. My inbox buzzed with pings, my phone with calls, but I stayed still. Vindication isn't loud. It just finally lets you exhale. At 9:32 p.m., I received an email from an encrypted account. Subject, FYI, not public. Inside were internal messages between Sabra and Sterling's branding team. One line stood out. "Let's remove Judy from all materials, for consistency." Attached was a document titled Legacy Strategy Transfer Memo, Confidential. It laid out, in corporate prose, how every component of Dignity Drives Growth would now be exclusively tied to Sabra's image, eliminating my name, history, and association. They hadn't just stolen my ideas, they'd filed paperwork to own my legacy. The buzz of my phone woke me before the light reached the windows. I blinked, groggy, and reached over to grab it, expecting another sterile calendar reminder or Greer's steady legal updates. Instead, the lock screen was packed with notifications, mentions, tags, pings from LinkedIn, Twitter, even TikTok. I sat up, the sheets falling from my shoulder, and scrolled through them, blinking harder now. One video had gone viral overnight. A former intern, Marigold, sweet, quiet Marigold, who once interned under me when I still had an office, had posted a video. The headline of the repost read, "You don't know her name, but you should." In it, she sat in her car, tear-streaked but clear-eyed, recounting the moment she nearly got fired over a scheduling mistake. "Judy didn't just save my job," she said. "She didn't yell. She didn't throw me under the bus. She took the heat, quietly, handled it, taught me how to do better instead of making me feel like I'd ruined everything." That's what leadership looks like. You didn't see her because she was too busy holding the ladder. The clip ended. It had 3 million views. Comments flooded the post. "Who is Judy? Where was she at the gala? I want to hear her side." I stood there in the soft morning light, barefoot on cold floors, feeling something I hadn't in years. Noticed, not for show, but for substance. Visibility isn't validation, but it's a start. Later that morning, Marigold sent me a private message. "I didn't mean to make this big," she wrote. "I just thought people should know." I read the message 3 times before replying. "Thank you," I typed. "But let's keep the focus where it belongs, on truth, not drama." Greer called within the hour. "We're documenting this," she said. "This is a clear sign of cultural silencing. It adds to the pattern. We'll file it all." By noon, blogs had picked it up. Titles like "The Quiet Founder Behind Sterling's Shine" and "The Woman Written Out of Her Own Story" circulated on every platform.
Sterling's PR team, usually lightning fast, remained silent. They don't know how to spin what they didn't orchestrate, I murmured. Then came the family, not all at once, not with warmth, but with tension. A text from my niece popped up around 3 p.m. I saw the video. I didn't know. No emoji, no pretense. I stared at the message until it blurred. Still nothing from Nobel, nothing from Sabra. But the cousins started creeping in. Awkward, stumbling messages laced with guilt and plausible deniability. The kind of checking-in texts you send when you know you stood in the wrong corner of a room and hope no one noticed. Then came the call I didn't expect. Alara, Nobel's ex-wife. We hadn't spoken in 5 years. Her voice was soft. "Hi, Judy." "Alara," I said, shocked more by her tone than her number on my screen. "I hope I'm not overstepping," she began, "but I saw the news, the articles, the TikTok. I thought maybe it was time." I didn't say anything, letting the pause stretch. "I always knew," she continued. "I mean, not everything, but I saw how much you did, how little credit they gave you. I stayed quiet to protect the kids, to stay out of it, but I'm not going to make that mistake again." "Elara," I began, uncertain where this was going. "There's something you should know," she said. "Years ago, Nobel redirected funds from the joint charity account, labeled it marketing. It wasn't. It was Sabra's expenses, private trips, boutique invoices, stylist contracts." My throat tightened. "You have proof?" I asked. "I kept everything. In case. For the kids. For court. But if it can help you now, I want it to." "Are you willing to submit a statement?" I asked. "I already started writing it," she said. "You were erased." "I won't be silent about that anymore." When we hung up, I felt like the floor had shifted beneath me, not because I was shocked by Nobel's actions. That part I already suspected. What I hadn't expected was support from someone who'd once been just as erased. That night, Alara sent over the documents, scanned financial logs, old emails, internal memos. Greer reviewed them and confirmed what I feared and needed to hear. This opens up a whole new lane. We're looking at financial misconduct, fraud tied to marketing expenses, and a potential breach of fiduciary duty. I stared at the files, then whispered, "He didn't just cut me out. He stole from me." What shook me most wasn't the theft. It was how easily it had hidden in plain sight. Before bed, I printed Alara's statement, labeled the new folder, Corruption Tide, Phase 2, and added it to the fireproof box under my bed. I wasn't alone anymore. The next morning, I sat with every piece of paper I had ever archived. Emails, annotated decks, voice transcripts, even the silly sticky notes I used to put on investor pitch folders. I arranged them around me like a circle of witnesses. This wasn't revenge. This was reclamation. I recorded another video, just for myself. My hair unbrushed, sweatshirt on, no script, just me. I looked into the camera and said, "Being remembered by strangers more than by your own family is strange, but it also means the truth didn't die in a boardroom." I ended the video quoting Maya Angelou, "There is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside you." Then I breathed. For the first time, that agony felt lighter. Just as I closed my laptop, a calendar ping pulled me back in. An emergency Sterling board meeting had been scheduled. Subject: Legacy Ownership Dispute. I wasn't invited, but an anonymous internal email forwarded me the agenda. I stared at it for a moment, then smiled. They're about to have a conversation about me. Without me. Again. Not this time. By late afternoon, my inbox was a battlefield. Subject lines blared like headlines. Interview request, NYT. Urgent, CNBC comment. Confirming availability for on-camera appearance. I scrolled without clicking. I didn't need to read their questions. I already knew the story they wanted. The articles had dropped that morning. Titles like The Invisible Architect of Sterling and Was the Mistress the Mastermind? Trended across every feed. Journalists were piecing together the obvious. But what shook the public wasn't what was said. It was what wasn't. My name wasn't in the headline. My face wasn't attached to the movement. But my words, my phrasing, my history, they were all there, stripped and reassembled. Greer called mid-scroll. "They're spiraling behind the curtain," she said. "PR can't get ahead of it. Internal Slack leaks, anonymous tips. Half their media contacts have stopped returning calls." "Let them run in circles," I said quietly. "I'm not here to win a debate. I'm here to close a chapter." My voice wasn't on record, but it was being quoted everywhere. Then, predictably, Sabra appeared. She chose daytime TV, a talk show popular with suburban households, the kind of programming where guests cried between commercial breaks and soft piano music underscored every monologue. Sabra looked immaculate. Cream blouse, pearl earrings, hair pulled back just loose enough to look effortless. She clasped her hands and leaned forward, voice trembling just enough to seem unrehearsed. "I just wanted to help build something meaningful," she said. "The jealousy, the attacks, I didn't expect them from family." She never said my name, but every word was pointed like a knife wrapped in lace. "She's portraying you as unhinged," Greer said over the phone, having seen the same segment. "A bitter sister, a woman scorned." "She's playing her role," I replied. "Let her." Social media was torn. Half swallowed her performance whole. The other half dissected it like an autopsy, calling out her inconsistencies, noting her script. I didn't respond. I didn't repost. I just waited. Because truth doesn't interrupt. It waits. And then it hit. A leaked recording, audio pulled from the gala, captured behind the scenes and released anonymously. I played it once, then again. Sabra's voice, clear and cold. "Judy, she's nothing but a line item. If she shows up, security knows what to do." There it was. Not tears, not trembling, just cruelty. Flat and administrative. The media jumped like sharks. Screens were split. On the left, Sabra crying on television. On the right, her voice in the shadows, dry and surgical. Commentators replayed the juxtaposition over and over. The narrative flipped. She wasn't the victim. She was the strategist. And worse, she was sloppy. By evening, sponsors began pulling out of Sterling's partnerships. Quietly, then not so quietly. One brand even released a public statement citing ethical misalignment with the firm's leadership. I did nothing, and in that silence, I spoke louder than I ever had. "That was the knife," Greer texted, "and she sharpened it herself." Around 7 p.m., my phone rang. A number I didn't recognize. Sterling's head of legal. They wanted a private conversation. "We think there may be a way to move forward," the voice said. "We're drafting a joint statement, something that reflects shared values and restores family dignity." "I didn't start this campaign," I said, cutting him off. "You did. I just stopped walking away from it." I hung up. Documented the call. Saved a transcript. Every step accounted for. No emotion. Just ledger entries. The board was splintering. Rumors of Nobel stepping down circulated faster than PR could plug the holes. Some wanted a reset, others wanted blood. I wanted neither. I wanted air. So I drove. Not far, just 20 minutes out, to where the cemetery overlooked the marsh. My mother's grave sat under a magnolia tree, quiet, shaded, undisturbed. I sat cross-legged with my coffee in silence. "She taught me to stand still when people push," I murmured. I didn't realize until now that standing still was a form of power. I didn't feel victorious. I felt whole. She would have hated the spectacle, but I think she would have understood the stance. The decision not to let others carve my legacy without my hand on the chisel. "I'm no longer ashamed to be seen," I whispered to the stone. Before leaving, I pulled a pen from my bag and scribbled in the margin of my notebook. "Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes, it just doesn't flinch." As I stepped back into the car, my phone lit up again. A new voicemail. I hit play. It was Nobel. His voice didn't carry the usual arrogance. No irritation. No bargaining tone. Just 5 words. "We need to talk." Alone. I stared out the windshield, rain beginning to tap again on the glass. He finally called me by name, but I'm no longer the woman who waited for it. The voicemail had been short, 5 words, spoken with a gravity that felt almost foreign. "We need to talk. Alone." I replayed it once, not because I needed to hear it again, but because I wanted to be sure I heard what he didn't say. No apology, no explanation, just a summons after months of avoidance. I didn't feel shaken, just curious. I called Greer that morning, gave her the basics. She listened, silent as usual, until I finished. "Neutral ground only," she said. "No home turf advantage. Bring a recorder. Don't go for closure. Go for clarity." I booked a table at the same waterfront hotel where it all fell apart. Same structure, different purpose. This time, I wasn't stepping into a trap. I was hosting a reckoning. "If this ends where it started," I muttered to myself, buttoning the charcoal blazer Mama used to call my steel spine suit, "it won't be on my knees." I arrived 20 minutes early and chose a booth tucked by the window, away from the bar, facing the door. I didn't fidget, I didn't sip, I just waited. And then, there he was. Nobel didn't stride in like he usually did. He shuffled, uncertain, dressed too formally in a navy suit that looked borrowed from confidence he no longer had. His eyes scanned the room, landed on me, and stayed. He walked over, slow and tight in the shoulders. "Hi, Judy." "Have a seat," I said. For 5 minutes, we talked about nothing. Weather, city traffic, a restaurant we used to go to as kids. I let him talk. I gave him space to pretend this was normal. Then, when the silence hung too long, I leaned in. "You didn't answer my calls," he said, quiet but not gentle. I met his gaze. 67 of them," I replied. I counted. "You never left a message." He looked down. That one landed. We sat in silence for a moment. I took a slow sip of my tea, letting the steam rise between us like a wall. "I didn't come here to rehash," I said finally. "I came to make sure you heard this from me, direct." He nodded, eyes still downcast. "I never meant for it to go this far," he said. I thought the PR team had it under control. Sabra." She pushed hard. "The board? You weren't silent because you didn't know," I cut in, voice level. "You were silent because it was convenient." He looked up, wounded. "You let her call security. You let my name be erased. You let every legacy I carried for this company be sliced off and sold with her face on the packaging." Nobel's shoulders deflated. For once, he had no retort. "People talk about betrayal like it's a single blow," I continued. "But it's really a series of quiet decisions. You made every one." His mouth opened, then closed. I didn't need his tears. I didn't need anything from him. "I didn't come here to forgive," I said. "I came to say this to your face. I will not carry what you dropped." I reached into my bag, pulled out an envelope, and slid it across the table. Inside was a printed copy of my official statement to the board, the one that severed my ties, detailed my contributions, listed my legal position. "This is my narrative now," I said, "and you're no longer its narrator." He sat still, staring at the envelope like it weighed more than paper should. "What do you want?" he asked finally. "An apology? Reconciliation?" I shook my head. "I want distance," I replied, "and peace. You'll get one of those." I stood up, collected my bag, and turned to go. Then I paused. He said my name. "Judy." It wasn't sharp. It wasn't commanding. It wasn't even familiar. It was human. I turned back just for a moment. He looked like someone I used to know. A stranger wearing the face of a boy who once protected me from a bully at the bus stop. I studied him like a photo I hadn't seen in years, and then I nodded. A micro-grace. Not forgiveness, not approval, just acknowledgement. Then I walked out. I didn't rush. Outside, the breeze off the water felt less like an end and more like an inhale. I got into my car, hands steady on the wheel. My phone buzzed. New email from Sterling's CFO. Subject line: Board resolution passed. Ownership reallocation effective immediately. I read it once, then leaned back and exhaled. The empire didn't collapse. I just stopped holding it up. No press badge, no RSVP, no fanfare. I walked into the Sterling Annual Press Summit through the main entrance, my heels clicking against the marble floor with calm finality.
Heads turned slowly, first in confusion, then in hushed recognition. I wasn't on the program, I wasn't on the list, but I wasn't a guest. Not this time. The mother-of-pearl necklace rested lightly on my collarbone. More memory than statement now. It wasn't armor. It was closure. The board members seated near the front of the hall froze as I walked past them. Sabra's hand, resting on the podium, clenched visibly before she stepped back. I didn't look at her. I didn't need to. The microphones in front of the press table squealed slightly as I adjusted one. I didn't speak for applause or validation. I spoke to finish something that had been twisted too long. If my name was never meant to be remembered in this room, I said, voice steady, then I'll let it echo in one where it can't be erased. A camera clicked. A journalist lowered her phone slowly, lips parted as if she forgot to breathe. I reached into my bag and pulled out a single manila folder. The documents inside were the result of sleepless nights, strategic reviews, and one decision I never once second-guessed. This is my final legal motion, I said, turning the folder toward the board. Complete severance from all licensing agreements, royalties, and intellectual rights tied to Sterling Holdings. Gasps rippled across the room. I opened the folder, slid it onto the podium. Effective immediately, you no longer have permission to use, promote, or profit from any material I created under your brand. One woman whispered, Jesus Christ. They sold a story with a ghost, I added, my tone quiet but direct. But I just reclaimed the pen. Sabra's name was called. A junior exec motioned her toward the hallway. She left. I didn't flinch. Nobel sat perfectly still, the same blue suit from our meeting 2 days earlier now wrinkled at the cuffs. I didn't need him to speak. I didn't need any of them to. I let the silence stretch until it broke on its own. Then, with nothing more to add, I stepped away from the mic, laid the folder down, and walked out. No press followed. They were too stunned. Outside, the sun hit just right. The air was crisp. I passed former co-workers in the courtyard. None looked at me. One young woman I didn't recognize brushed past and whispered, "Thank you," under her breath. I kept walking. I didn't need applause. I needed out. I didn't give interviews. I didn't post on social media. I didn't craft a caption or write a newsletter. I just left. And in that leaving, I found something better than vindication. Stillness. Sterling's stock dipped the next morning, not drastically, but enough. Within 3 days, Sabra released a statement citing mental strain and a desire to refocus on family. A week later, Nobel's letter of resignation circulated through internal channels and was leaked before HR could sanitize it. He offered deep regrets for a misalignment in values. The public was unmoved. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. By then, I was already in Arizona, answering calls not from reporters, but from clients at the legal aid clinic I'd quietly joined part-time. No conference rooms, no Zoom filters, just real people, real stories. I still had days where I'd look at an old draft and feel the sting of erasure, but they passed faster now. I wrote in my journal one evening, "If they want legacy, they can keep the building. I've taken back the blueprint." I wrote a letter to my younger self, sealed it, placed it in the same drawer where I kept my mother's scarf. It read, "Don't wait to be chosen. Choose yourself sooner." I donated the last check from Sterling to a scholarship fund in Mama's name, one for women who had to fight twice as hard to be remembered for half as much. I set boundaries. No more calls from media, no more requests for retrospectives or founder perspective interviews, no more pretending I owed anyone my story. I wasn't chasing clarity anymore. I had it. Closure wasn't loud. It was walking through a city without flinching when someone said your name wrong or didn't say it at all. It was drinking your morning coffee in peace. It was having nothing left to prove. At home that night, I opened the same velvet box where the pearls had rested all these years. I removed the necklace slowly, ran my fingers across each smooth bead. Then, with both hands, I placed it inside the box for the final time. Beside it, I added a note. "You were always more than their story. Now you're mine." I closed the lid. stepped out onto the porch.
The Arizona light hit my face full. They told me I was useless. I told the world I was done.